the relentlessly negative doom and gloom news media. It's the Nick Stenger Show, coming to you live from the Stenger Family Office headquarters. It's your host, Nick Stenger.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Nick Stenger Show. My name's Nick Stenger. We are Stenger Family Office. For the past 45 years, the Stenger family has made it our mission to deliver you clarity and confidence to help secure your financial future. Yes, we did take a little bit of time off here, baby number 3 in the Stenger family, so everybody's doing well. And that's why we were not in the studio for a few weeks, but we are back at it. Let not your heart be troubled. We are going to hit it hard today here with episode 222, the AI Slop Fest. And yes, I do think a lot of AI is slop. I told you this last year with that episode we did that was all about the AI Tower of Babel and how people wanted to be like gods. And back in the Bible days, back with the Tower of Babel, and we all know what happened with that. It came crashing down, and I would not be surprised if we saw something similar with pockets of AI. Not everything with AI, but pockets. And we are going to get into that in just 2 seconds. But before we do, I want to remind you about Investor Day coming up right around the corner. It is quickly approaching October 8th and 9th in Oak Brook. We are almost at max capacity. We have not sent out the last email yet, and that last email is always the push where it fills up almost instantaneously, just a couple of spots. I think we have about 20 spots or so left. So if you have been thinking about coming to Investor Day, Katie, the Greek, our producer today, has put it in the description on YouTube, and you cannot miss this thing. Just click on the link to Investor Day and don't miss it. Tom Lee is headlining this year. Absolutely tremendous, a legend in the business, and you can't miss him. You can't miss the other guest speakers and seeing our team in person. Don't miss Investor Day this year, October 8th and 9th in Oak Brook, Illinois. With that, let's talk about the AI Slop Fest. Yes, a lot of AI, as you may or may not have noticed, is just complete slop. You put stuff into ChatGPT or Claude, and the output is just nonsense. Now, some of it's good. Some of it is just a great search engine. It's a great scraping of the entire internet when you have a problem and you want to come up with a quick solution. But a lot of it is just garbage because garbage in is garbage out. You have to remember the chat bots and the LLMs and all these systems that we see as end users, for the most part, are just one tentacle of AI. It's just one of the things that you see on the surface, and that is a lot of slop. I think there's a lot of AI hype out there. I think there's a lot of robotic hype. You know, if you think back to just the basic robotics days, before we got into machine learning, the cloud, true AI, all the stuff that we're seeing today, before we got into that, people have been predicting for years that robots were going to push humans off the face of the earth, and that's just not the case. Amazon's been using robots in their warehouses forever, and they have tons of employees. It's not like you can run Amazon with just robots. It's just that the humans are doing other things. I was in a Sweet Green salad location the other day. Yes, I did eat a salad. You may be surprised, but I did, and it was delicious, so shout out to Sweet Green. But you go into Sweet Green, and it's a big salad robot making these bowls, and it's absolutely fascinating. I would encourage you, go to the one in Chicago or go to one in a large metropolitan area, and it's absolutely astounding. It was just bowl after bowl after bowl after bowl coming out of the salad robot. And I noticed something, though, at the same time, as they had this big salad robot making all these items for people, they also had an army of people in there working next to the robot. It wasn't like you could just leave this thing unsupervised and you don't need any workers. You actually need a lot of workers. So what happens with AI and technology and innovation is it's not that it pushes human beings off the face of the earth. It doesn't displace us. And in fact, every technological wave ever in U.S. history has actually ended up with more jobs, more unfilled jobs at the end of it than when we started, but they're just different jobs. And so you think about that Sweet Green salad location, somebody's got to bag the salad and hand it off. Somebody's got to make sure that everything's going okay. So, somebody's got to work on that robot machine when it breaks down. Somebody's got to make the parts for the machine. Somebody's got to innovate and have the real estate. And so what ultimately happens that I've noticed is because of the technology at a place like Sweet Green and some of these other stores is that they can actually open up more locations than ever. And so it's not that robot put people out of work. It's the opposite. It's abundance mindset like technology always does. it allows you to do more because you're able to get the cost of this food down to a point where you have more customers than ever before, more demand than ever before. So not only does technology reduce costs, but it increases demand at the same time because the price point is going down. This is very obvious if you've seen the tech wave that's happened since the 1990s with the cost of memory chips, the cost of compute, the cost of cloud, the cost of even an iPhone. Your iPhone in your pocket today is more powerful than the best computers at MIT in the 1980s. It's just absolutely astounding what's happened because of innovation. And so what it does is as those prices come down, as the price of the sweet green salad comes down, there's more demand for that salad, and that allows them to open up more locations, which does what? Requires more people. And so that's why technology always, always, always is a good thing. And I think, in a sense, technology is a miracle from above. And we are, given these people are given these ideas. We have these, people have such brilliant minds, especially in the U.S. here, where all these people have come from other places. We are just an absolute melting pot of the best ideas on earth. And you've seen the best Latin Americans come here. You've seen the best Russians and Chinese and Japanese and Africans, and everybody wants to be right here in the United States because we've given people in the United States the rule of law, personal property rights, the ability to innovate and pass down a legacy. And so we've just got some of the most incredible entrepreneurs right on our soil. And if you don't pay attention to what's really happening behind the scenes, you are going to miss the fact that things have never moved this fast before, and they're never going to move this slow again, like Brian Westbury at First Trust Portfolios pointed out. So you should absolutely be an optimist. Now, I'm not telling you that everything is rosy, that there doesn't have to be rules and guardrails and all the rest of it. There absolutely does, and that's existed in every technological wave. The government has to catch up, regulation has to catch up, and we do need stoplights, we need red tape, we need some, obviously rules of the road and regulation. But because the U.S., for the most part, has been somewhat reasonable on regulation compared to the rest of the world, look at a place like Europe. Europe has just basically regulated every company out of existence. And where do they want to go? They want to get out of Europe and they want to come to Houston, Texas. They want to come to Chicago. They want to come to San Francisco. They want to go to Miami, where all this innovation is happening, New York City. And that's exactly the model of wealth creation. And so, yes, we're not perfect. We don't have everything perfect in the U.S. There's problems, there's issues, of course, but we have been consistently the best place for people to innovate. I want to go back to this idea of AI slop. I do think a lot of AI, I think a good piece of it is just way, way overdone. I think companies are delivering AI chatbots. They're delivering AI products that nobody even asked for, and it's going to catch up with them. And I think one of the things you're seeing is that actually in a lot of cases, a lot of the human workers will actually end up being cheaper for companies to have on their payrolls than it would be to run LLMs or to run these AI systems. It takes incredible amounts of money and incredible amounts of compute and data centers and all the rest of it to run AI. And I think a lot of companies are saying, wait a second, we're spending more now on AI than we just did on our workers. So I think people are going to have to pivot. I think companies that are doing these massive layoffs thinking they're going to get AI savings are going to have to pivot. And in a few years, we're going to be right back to a labor shortage, which is what I predicted last week or last episode. And you're already seeing elements of that. You saw it at IBM where they don't have any entry-level workers, so they don't have any continuity. And when people retire, they don't have people to replace those retired folks. And that's a big, big problem. And I also don't think that the layoffs you're seeing at some of the big tech companies, Meta, Amazon, some of the layoffs at Microsoft and all the rest of it, I don't think those are indicative of AI, which sounds completely backwards. I actually think those are indicative of just overhiring during COVID. You had people fighting a talent war during 2020 and 2021, just trying to stack their roster with as many developers as they could and coders and cybersecurity analysts. And they're just realizing to run this business, we don't necessarily need 80,000 people. We might be able to do it with 60,000. So that headline number of 20,000 layoffs sounds horrible. It sounds bad, but I'm already seeing underneath the surface. I have friends in technology and SaaS sales and all over the place in the technology world, and they're saying that, yes, some people are getting laid off, of course, but they're finding jobs so quickly now you couldn't believe. It might take them 6 months, it might take them 9 months, but you have to remember some of these people are making $300,000-$400,000 at their big tech job when you include the options and everything else, and they're just going to other places now, and they're going to places that are not necessarily technology companies. They're just companies using the technology. So you see this in the jobs report. You see this in the unfilled jobs numbers. You see this in the unemployment rate. We have not had this massive spike. And you also have to remember that we have not had a massive spike in unemployment, even though AI has been out since 2020, 2021. I have some clients who would say, Nick, AI has been out a lot longer than even 2021. This is not new stuff. We've had machine learning. We've had cloud compute for a long time. We've had a lot of these technologies. What you're really seeing is just the headline news of, look what Claude can do, for example. And I'm not disparaging what Claude can do. I think it is pretty impressive. I think some of these things that you're seeing with Claude and OpenAI and some of these things are really neat. But at the end of the day, nothing fundamentally has really changed underneath the surface of what makes these systems work. You still need human wisdom, and that's been the case since the 1990s, as we've had this third industrial revolution and now the fourth industrial revolution. The third was really the information age, the internet age, and you would think with the internet wave and the technology boom and all this information out there, you wouldn't need human workers at all. But the reality is actually more information creates more confusion and less clarity and less wisdom. And so the advice business is in high demand. If you've had a good doctor that you've gone to lately, or a good CPA, or a good financial advisor, or a good a professional that you've worked with in any sort of advice business, you realize how important it is to have a trusted advisor that can really put all this information together for you and give you some clarity on how to proceed. And even something as simple as landscaping. I saw this with landscaping where, yes, you can take a picture of your house now and get a landscape design, and you can get an idea of what it should look like and all that. ChatGPT is great at all that. But you still need somebody to come in who's got experience and wisdom and actually tell you this is how it is implemented. This is how it works. And that's just something you can't replace. It's just not possible. And so I do still think that there's an element of AI that has a Tower of Babel piece to it. I think a lot of people now, you read some of these AI researchers and you listen to the World Economic Forum and these people like Klaus Schwab, who sound really scary, and quite frankly, they kind of are scary, talking about how we're going to be AI gods and we're going to be omniscient and omnipresent and we're going to know everything and we're going to be just like God. And I just say, wait a second, that sounds just like the Tower of Babel. It sounds just like people trying to become like God. And I don't think that stands for forever. And so we do have to be careful of that with the portfolio. That is why you have to have the same worldview as your advisor, at least to an extent, because if your portfolio is all AI stocks, for example, and it's all tied to this idea that we're never going to need human work and people are going to be gods and we're going to invest in this idea, watch out. I think you got to be really careful with that. And again, it's not like the run can't continue. We're still going to see semis, I think, keep doing well for a while and all the rest of it. But you just have to have a balanced mix, and you have to understand where you see the world, what your worldview is. And it's very similar to what we went through during 2020 and 2021, where we told you the world was going to return to normal. Now, saying that today seems obvious. Everybody's like, well, of course we knew the world was going to return to normal. That was not the norm. If you go out and you do some basic internet research on the archives, you're going to realize that actually most people thought that we were going to have a new normal forever. There's going to be this new idea of how we were going to live post-COVID. And we told you that's just not the case. And I just used that example to say that you have to know where we're going. You have to understand the worldview of who's managing the portfolio. Because if you dive into some of these narratives, and this is what I try to tell you on the show every week, is watch the narrative. Be careful before you buy into the narrative. If you buy in hook, line, and sinker to the prevailing narrative, you just got to be really, really, really careful with the long-term effects on portfolio performance, because it can really have detrimental effects. And there were people during 2020, for example, and I don't mean this in a political way, so don't hear this the wrong way, but there were people during 2020 2020, for example, who panicked and shorted ExxonMobil at $30 a share, saying that we were everybody's going to be on an EV and we were never going to have gas again. Well, that was a horrible idea, especially when it gets into the investment portfolio. Now, you may be asking yourself, Nick, how in the world would anybody think it's a good idea to short ExxonMobil at $30 a share and then go buy a company, for example, that's trading at 1,800 times earnings? And you think there's no way a professional investor would do that. Well, that's exactly what the Dow Jones Index did. That's what these people who run the Dow Jones did, is they sold Exxon at the bottom and they replaced it with Salesforce, which was in fact trading at 1,800 times earnings. So you just have to understand where the people are coming from that are running the portfolio. And I think as we look into the future, you don't exactly have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what the future holds. But I think the next thing here coming is I think people are going to realize there's a lot of AI slop out there that has created a bubble. And it's not to say every single piece of AI is a bubble. I think there's some great companies that are trading at reasonable prices that are making products and services within that AI world that are not a bubble. And I don't think the rest of the market's even close to a bubble. If you look at the S&P today, we're in a 5% pullback from the record all-time high of 7,600 points. We're at about 7,300 today. And that makes the S&P actually a very reasonable value if you're buying the right companies. But again, you have to remember why you're owning what you're owning, and we like the laser-like precision of direct indexing, of owning the actual companies and understanding the portfolio as a basket of companies, not just a market. Because there was a time from 2000 to 2010 called the lost decade. This is where the S&P produced a 1% return, not per year, a total return of 1%. Over a 10-year time frame, with the tech bubble in 1999, followed up at the back end of the decade of 08 and 09 with the financial crisis. And that was a terrible time to be market cap weighted. And so, I just say to people, I say it's not like every single environment ever has favored just doing nothing and just watching the portfolio grow and not worrying about what you own. That is not the case. And especially if you own, or rather if you're in retirement, you really have to pay attention to what you own. And it's okay if you produce 7, 8, 10% returns with steady, consistent stocks. That's okay. And I think one of the things you'll see in an environment like we're in today, I don't think we're quite there, but we're getting there. In an environment like we are today, you may see people saying, oh, yeah, I got 30% annualized, 40% annualized. Look at my returns, off the charts. And eventually that stuff comes back to reality, and you end up paying the price if you overpay for equities. So watch those PE ratios. That's part of the reason you have us, is just to keep an eye on valuations. You have us to keep an eye on are we paying the right price for equities? Because at some point, the bill will come due for these companies that are trading at 200, 300, 400 times earnings. So that's what I have to say about the AI slop. Now, one of the things I wanted to just mention is the inflation expectations for the next 12 months are expected to remain very elevated. We're trending towards about 4.2%, which is higher than the 50, 60, 70-year average, which is closer to about 3.5, 3.6%. Now, where's that inflation coming from? That inflation's coming from food and energy. So when you start taking out food and energy, which is really called sticky price inflation is much more moderated. And I think the thing that you're going to see with the Fed is the Fed under Kevin Warsh is going to follow sticky price inflation a little bit more than food and energy. And that's okay in a sense that we're probably not going to get rate hikes. And I don't think we should get rate hikes. I think rate hikes would be a massive mistake. I think that would be not be a good idea. But what we do need to do is we just need to get government incentives to a point where we get gas and food prices much more reasonable. And this Iran thing has not really helped in the short run. Who knows where it ultimately goes in the long run? And there are some people that say it's going to be a good thing in the long run. There's people that say it's going to be a bad thing in the long run. And I don't know. I'm not here to comment on the politics of it or what's going to happen long term with it. But what I do know is you have to be prepared for this kind of stuff in your financial plan. And if you're still using a 2% inflation rate in the financial plan, plan, you're toast. It's not going to work. And so we have upped our financial planning inflationary targets closer to that 3.5, 3.6% long-range number. We're not going to be at 4% forever, but I do think we're going to trend a little bit hotter for a while, which is very similar to the 1980s, not dissimilar to when we came out of the Carter years in the 70s, and we had Paul Volcker at the Fed and Ronald Reagan in the White House in the 1980s, that we saw inflation that was persistent for a very long time. But at the same time that inflation was hotter than normal, we also saw equity returns doing quite well. Why is it that you could have high inflation but also have good equity returns? Well, it's pricing power. It's the makeup of the companies we're buying. And so if you're buying companies that are heavily tech-enabled, and I'm not talking about buying Anthropic, I'm not talking about buying the OpenAI IPO, and maybe you're going to do that, maybe you're not. I'm not going to do it, but maybe you will. I'm not talking about doing something like that. I'm talking about buying tried and true U.S. companies, blue chips, that are using technology. We have never been able to reduce costs like we are today using technology like we are now. And so I think in a sense, yes, the inflation is going to be high, but companies' ability to deal with that inflation has never been better. And so that's exactly what we saw in the 80s. We saw this industrial revolution coming in. We saw technology getting better, quicker, faster, reducing costs. And so companies, while they were seeing higher input costs, they were able to reduce some of those input costs to a large extent with tech. And I think you're seeing the same thing today. So yes, we've had persistent inflation since 2021 because we printed 45% more dollars into the economy. No big surprise there. You print more money, your dollar's worth less, inflation is up, and no surprise that we've seen the run up in prices that we have for the past 4 or 5 years now. But at the same time, it's not really surprising either. If you watched the show 4 or 5 years ago now, it's not really surprising that we've had the equity returns we've had. And I've told you this. If you're one of the original listeners of this podcast and have been with us since the beginning, what did I tell you back to 2020, 2021? I said stay in equities. I think equities are going to be the best place to be. And you're seeing this now 2026 again. Listen to these asset class returns for all the people out there who are heckling us about being in international, being in gold and silver and Bitcoin and all these other asset classes. Listen to year-to-date 2026 now where the returns are at. The S&P is still up 7.5% year-to-date. Europe is up 3.5% year-to-date 2026. China is down 13%. Japan is up 12%. But it's only up half of the U.S. the past 5 years. Brazil is now only up 5%, actually 4% today, year to date. Gold is down 2%, silver is down 10%, Bitcoin's down 30%. So I'm just waiting for our apology from all the people who heckled us over getting into all these goofball asset classes. What did we tell you at Stenger Family Office? Tried and true, U.S. large caps. Stay on your plan. Stop getting distracted by all the nonsense. Just stay on your plan. And this is exactly why we've told you this. Look at the returns again year to date. And who knows how the rest of the year goes, but what we want to deliver our clients is consistency, predictability. We want to give you companies that, yeah, they're going to go down when the market's down, but we think they have a high degree of coming back through the entire cycle. That's the difference. So everything we told you, in a sense, came true. It took a little bit to see that. You know, you saw some of these international returns last year, some of these precious metal returns last year, and you thought, you know, oh, Nick's completely lost it. Stenger Family Office, you know, we're completely off the mark here. Well, you know, we've been doing this a long time now. We built the playbook in the 80s when we had this high inflation, and we were just going back to that playbook telling you this is what can happen. This inflation can run up a lot more than you realize. The Fed may have to stay higher for longer. You may see this, and when that happens, you're going to want to be in safe haven, high-quality assets. That's what we told you. So this is coming true now, and you're seeing it finally in real time. The last thing I want to talk about is what happened in the 80s with inflation relative to today, because one of the things I hear today, and I know there's a lot of people struggling out there, we see this in real time, we feel so much for these people who are really struggling, especially in the lower class, the middle class, and it is really due to a big government that has overprinted money. I want to just be very clear of that. It is really because of too much money printing. Government has never been a higher percentage of GDP as it is today. It's never been more contributory to our overall budget than it ever has been. And I'm at the same time, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have government. Government is ordained by God. I really do believe that. And if you don't have government and structure and all this other stuff that you need, you have chaos. And so we don't believe in that. But when you also go too far and you overregulate and you overtax and you make the government too big a portion of our GDP, of our day-to-day in the United States, you end up with basically crushing the small people. You crush the lower class, you crush the middle class. It's 1984, the boot stomping on the face. And you got to remember, Orwell was not a MAGA Republican. He was actually basically the opposite. He was sort of socially liberal. He was on the other end of things, but he was saying that a big government with the other side in power was not good either. It was the boot stomping on the face. And you see these pendulum swings in U.S. history where one group gets power, and what do? They want to increase the size of government. Then the next group gets power, and what do? They want to increase the size of government. And that's where we are today. And so listen to some of these stats. You may disagree with what I just said, but you cannot disagree with these numbers. Okay, federal tax today on a median household income, which is $84,000. Today, a household at $84,000 of income is paying $5,000 in federal tax, about $4,000 in state tax. If they're in a state like Illinois, they're paying less or more depending on what state they're in, but about $4,000 in Illinois. They're paying FICA tax. This is their biggest tax. Listen to this. This is Social Security and Medicare of $6,500 per year. They're paying more in Social Security and Medicare tax than federal tax. Very interesting. Their after-tax income is about $68,000, or about 80% or so of that $84,000 number. Their monthly take-home in this example is somewhere in the ballpark of about $5,700. Now, here's some of the costs that we're seeing with a family at $84,000 per year in income. Their rent and utilities are about $2,000. Their cars are about $1,000 a month in payments. Their gas is $300 a month typically. Groceries are about $800 a month. They're spending maybe $1,600 on other items. So they're barely able to save about $800, maybe $700, $800 a month. This is a very real thing. So if you talk to a lot of millennials today, if you talk to a lot of Gen Zers, if you talk to people who have been in the workforce that got laid off, this is a reality they're facing. It is very, very tight. That $800 number is not a large number, especially if something goes wrong. But let me also just point out, if we go back to 1986 now, this is 40 years of history, when the median income in the country was only $25,000. Today it's $84,000. Back then it was $25,000. Federal tax on that $25,000 was actually double as a percentage of income. It was 13% of that income number, $3,200. State tax was 2.5%. State tax in Illinois has doubled over the past 40 years. Think about that. FICA tax is about the same, about $1,800 or about 7% or so. Then you had a total tax number of about 22.5%. So taxes today are actually down relative to where they were in 1986, but listen to the cost now. So this family making $25,000 in 1986 would have been taking home about $1,600 a month after tax. Their average rent and utilities were about $550. Their average car was about $300 a month because the car price was $13,000 back then, and today it's obviously a higher price point. But even if you're spending, let's say, $50,000 on a new car today versus $13,000 back then in 1986, you're actually getting a better value today because the car is lasting longer, it's higher quality, it has more technology than it's ever had. And that's all proven with the data. People are keeping their cars about 5 years longer now on average than they used to because they can. Cars are just built better now. Here's groceries, about $300 a month, gas about $80 a month, about $1 per gallon. Today we're seeing about $5 a gallon with what's going on with Iran. And then other expenses we put at $300 a month. You actually had less take-home income in 1986 than you had today. What's the difference between 1986 and today? Well, the technology. It's never been better. And I was talking to one of the people at our on our team the other week, and he brought up the great point of Uber and this idea that Uber we used to think was magic. Like if you were using Uber 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago, you'd felt like it was magic. You'd put a button in on your phone, you'd say where you want to go, and 2 minutes later the car would come. And I'm sure this is exactly how people felt when flying came out, when commercial airlines came out, and you could go from New York to California in 6 hours versus days and days and days on a horse and buggy. That had to be an amazing thing. That felt like a miracle, and it was. Well, same thing with Uber. So in our example of Uber, we started asking the question, why aren't people more amazed by this technology we have? You can punch in your phone, I need to go to the airport here, I'm in, wherever, I need to go 30 miles to the airport, and somebody will come pick you up, and for the price of $70, $80, take you to the airport. That would have cost thousands of dollars in 1986. That would have been unheard of. There was no chance that was going to happen to the extent it does today. And so what has technology done? It's democratized things for everybody else out there. And so this is the big thing that people are feeling, and this may sound a little counter-narrative or against what you hear in the media, but I think what you're seeing today is people are really not sticking to their plans as much as they could be. So the people you're seeing struggling out there now, and you're seeing not really, they're really feeling the crunch. It's usually one of two things. They're either below this median income of $84,000, and that really is a big problem. That is a really big deal. But people over that number, people over that $84,000, I see families that are making $150,000, $200,000, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. And I ask the question, why? Well, I see the credit card bill. I see, every day at Starbucks, I see, $1,000 car payment for a truck that costs $70,000 when they could have bought a used truck for $40,000. I see a lot of mistakes being made that are self-inflicted mistakes. And so despite all of that, though, the saving grace has been technology. The fact that we have Uber, we have the average flights coming down, flight prices, yes, they seem high, but relative to 1986, it's a rounding error. The fact that we've been able to deliver this kind of lifestyle to the average American is absolutely a miracle. So my financial planning note is save first. Don't spend first and then save what's later. Save first, put that money aside, look at the long term of the plan and say, where am I going? When would I like to retire? How much money am I going to need to stay retired for 30 years? And start with that. Because I've got plenty of clients and clients' kids in particular and grandkids in some cases that are at that $84,000 median income and they're doing just fine. They're watching their money. They're putting money in their 401k every month. They're saving first and they're building long-term plans despite not making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. So it is a choice. Financial planning is a choice you can make, and you have to be consistent and disciplined, and you have to save first. And so that's the message I would have for everybody out there who's feeling the crunch today. Really take a hard look at your credit card bill. Am I doing too much on Uber Eats? Am I doing too much at DoorDash? Am I maybe traveling to Europe too many times? Look at these expenses, and am I going to Starbucks more than I really have to when I could be buying a coffee at home or making a coffee at home? And this is where you're going to find that you can actually put together quite a nice plan, but that money has got to go in the stock market. It's got to go into asset classes that are going to beat inflation. So that's the last point I want to make today, that the wealth that you've seen, millennial net worth today, which is counter-narrative, is up 4 times higher than it was in 2019. Why is that? Where has that wealth been created? It's been created in the stock market, created in assets. And so that's exactly what we keep telling people. The days of having a pension, the days of having defined benefit where the money's going to come in every month is just not happening anymore. And today, it's the stock market. So you have got to make sure that on a consistent basis, you're staying invested. And for the people that we work with, there are a lot of retirees and getting close to retirement, you got to stay in equities. So despite this 5% pullback we're in, despite if we get into a 10% pullback, which we easily could, S&P in the 7,200 point range, despite all that, you've just got to stay invested, because the place you're going to see your best returns and your inflation-beating power over time is U.S. large-cap equities. That's been the case for 200 years. Dr. Jeremy Siegel of the Wharton School of Stocks for the long run. So absolutely stay on your plan. Do not panic. Get as much money going into equities and assets as you can, because that's the saving grace of inflation. I'm not saying it's not bad for people out there. It is. We're seeing it. I talk to people every single day, and I see people feeling the crunch. But I also see people who are at this median household income, below this median household income, and because they're disciplined, because they're staying on their plans, they're doing okay, and they're going to be able to get to retirement no problem because they're in equities. So that's what I've got for you on episode 222 this week. We're going to be back next week with 223. Don't forget to register for Investor Day, October 8th and 9th, almost full. Tom Lee headlining in Oak Brook, right outside of the city of Chicago. And don't forget to register. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.